Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and here's a little bit of information about phrases, clauses, and sentences. The main focus here really is going to be sentences, but I did want to review briefly what phrases and clauses are to start off with. So let's get going here. Phrase, clauses, and sentences. There's a problem with that already. It should say phrases. Okay. Um, let's start off with exactly that. Phrases. So, what is a phrase? Well, phrases themselves are groups of words without a finite verb. Now again, finite verb? Now, that's a rather complicated concept, but the really easy way to remember it is it's just a verb that shows a subject and a time. Now again, let's specify this. A phrase, right? It's a group of words without a finite verb, meaning that there is no verb in there that clearly shows a subject and a time. So here's a couple of examples. 1. He is eating a sandwich. Whoops, is this a phrase? No! And the reason it's not a phrase is we can see right here, there's a clear subject, he. And we can see this right here, is eating. That expresses a time, present continuous. And it identifies the subject right here too with the is. Okay. Next up, she went to the store. Oh, that doesn't work either. We have a clear subject right here, she, and we have a clear verb that shows not only that it's she that did it, but also that it was in the past. Therefore, this one is not a phrase either. Next up, I don't know where the file is. Oh, this one is also a loser. Too bad. The reason for that being that, yes, we have a clear subject right here, and we have a verb, well, a verb phrase right here, which clearly identifies I as the subject, and tells us the time, too. Simple present, owing to the do right there. Okay, so let's look back up at this again. A phrase. It's a group of words without a finite verb, which is why all three of these don't work. We have, in each case, a finite verb. We have is eating, we have went, and we have don't know. In each case, we can figure out who the subject is, and we can figure out when it's happening. So, the opposite of finite, non-finite. Now, I know you might be thinking, should it be infinite? Yeah, well, that works too, but we're talking grammar right here, and yeah, grammar is annoying. Anyhow, let's take a look. So, non-finite. A non-finite verb is a verb that does not specify a subject or a time. So, let's take a look at this. The person having the most money. So are we talking the present right now, or are we talking present continuous, or are we talking simple present? What are we talking about? Is there really a subject right here? No. So this right here actually, bingo, works. This is a phrase. This right here is actually a phrase. We don't have any clear verb in here that identifies time or a subject. That means that the verb is non-finite. Great. So finally, we have ourselves a phrase. All right. Next up, one of the most important ideas. Hey, beautiful. Do we see a verb in here? Not at all. Because there's no verb, no subject, no nothing, bingo, we got ourselves another phrase. Wonderful. Let's take a look at another one here too. Each participant in the survey given by the department. Now, this is a little bit tricky, and I'm not going to go into all of it, and someone could argue that we have a reduced adjective clause in here, but keep in mind, even if you do have a reduced clause, what do you reduce a clause into? A phrase, which is exactly what we've got right here. Each participant in the survey given by the department, we have no clear subject, we have no clear time identified, so what we got right here, bingo, is another phrase. And there we go. So, to recap right there briefly, phrases are groups of words without a finite verb. That's how it works. Now, phrases can serve as various parts of a sentence. So they could be adverbs, adjectives, nouns, and verbs. Now, if we look up above, again, we had three examples of things that are not phrases. Those were right here. Right? And then we had three examples of things that are phrases. And what we're looking at right here is this. The ones above that are phrases actually are all a specific type of phrase. They are noun phrases. And let's take a look at exactly what that means. I have this right here. The person having the most money. Okay, I know that's a noun because I can take that whole phrase and make it the subject of a sentence. The person having the most money can buy anything. Boom. Now I have a complete sentence. Here's our subject, the person having the most money. Here's our verb phrase right here. Can buy, followed by the object, anything. Okay, great. Same deal with the next one. I'll get rid of that yes. One of the most important ideas is that of frugality. Let's just go with that. And here we have, again, another full sentence. Who's the subject right here? This whole phrase. And that tells us it's a noun phrase. I don't need to go into more detail about that at the moment. It's enough to show you that noun phrases are, without a doubt, the most common type of phrase in academic writing. Now, we have another type of phrase too, adverb phrases. Just as we saw before, a noun phrase serves as a noun, an adverb phrase serves as an adverb. Now keep in mind, an adverb can serve a couple of purposes. And one of the most common uses of an adverb is to modify an entire sentence. And that is exactly what you use adverb phrases for most of the time. Case in point, let's take a look at this. Due to the large amount of confusion about grammar. Okay, so we're saying here's a reason right here. I'm saying due to the large amount of confusion about grammar. Well, due to this what? We need to have a full independent clause after this to complete the sentence. So I could say due to the large amount of confusion about grammar, the teacher made a stupid video. Okay, so looking at that, what we have right here is a full phrase. And again, we know it's a phrase because we don't have a finite verb and a clear subject. The whole thing is saying, well, students were really confused about grammar. They didn't understand it. There was a large amount of confusion about grammar. And because of that, the teacher made a stupid video. So the whole phrase right here actually modifies the following independent clause. Let's take a look at another one. Despite his huge objections to the idea. Same deal. We're saying despite, even though. So this thing exists, but even though that's the case, all right, well, what? What happened? What's the deal? So what we need right here is another independent clause. So despite his huge objections to the idea, he went along with it anyway. And again, we find that this whole phrase right here, the adverb phrase, ends up modifying the subsequent sentence. Okay, and now comes the important part. Why should you care? Well, pretty simple. Phrases really are extremely common in academic writing, especially noun and adverb phrases. I'll say that again. Phrases are extremely common in academic writing, especially noun and adverb phrases. Now, let's skip down to the bottom and I'll show you what I mean. And we'll come back up briefly. Okay, here's an example of an actual paragraph written by a native English speaker. This is a senior in a psychology class. If we take a look at just the first sentence right here, undoubtedly one of the most influential events in the formation of the late baby boomers' political ideals was the Vietnam War. Okay, take a look at this. This whole thing right here. One of the most influential events in the formation of the late baby boomers' political ideals, blah, blah, blah. That is one noun phrase. That's it. Just one whole huge noun phrase. I mean, my goodness gracious, this is actually a pretty simple sentence if you look at it. We have adverb right here, undoubtedly, and then we have this giant noun phrase, and then we have the to be verb, and then we have another noun phrase right here. That's it. It's a simple sentence, and yet it's huge, it's long, and that's because there's a gigantic noun phrase. Let's see here. We could take a look, let's see here, add a few other things here too. I'm just going to go down to this sentence. Here we go. In moves similar to that of Vietnam. This right here is an example of what is oftentimes called a prepositional phrase, but keep in mind, prepositional phrases typically serve as adverb phrases in a given sentence, and that's exactly what's going on right here. We're saying that something was similar to Vietnam. What was? The moves, evidently. These moves are similar to something that happened in Vietnam, and that then modifies the clause that comes after it right here. Boom. I won't go into any more details right now. It's enough to simply say that, hey, guess what? Phrases really are extremely common in academic writing, especially noun and adverb phrases. Okay, next up, clauses. We've talked about phrases, and again, to recap briefly, Phrases are groups of words without a finite verb. Well, what do you think a clause is? Pretty simple. A clause is a group of words with a definite subject and a finite verb. So easy enough. We looked at these before. All of these right here where we said, no, 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 these are not phrases. These are actually clauses, and they are clauses for the same reason that they are not phrases. We have a clear subject in each one, he, she, and I. In each one we have a clear finite verb phrase, is eating, went, don't know. So that's really what we're looking at when we're talking about clauses. They are groups of words with a definite subject and a finite verb. There's two types, independent and dependent. Let's take a look at what we mean by that. Independent clauses. These are just clauses that can be stated by themselves. You can say them and you're done. You can put a period at the end of it. That's basically the way to remember them. If you can put a period at the end of it, just a little dot, okay, great. You got yourself an independent clause. Here's an example. He went home just now. Nice and simple. We have a subject, he. We have ourselves a verb, went. And there you go. Here's another one. I, and here's another, that's the subject right there. Did. There's our verb. Shows us that it's the past tense. Identifies the subject clearly too. And there you go. We can put a period at the end of it. It can be stated by itself. That's why we call it independent. It doesn't need anything else. It doesn't require any help. Okay, those are independent clauses. Taking a peek back up here at the top, hey, guess what? Same deal. He is eating a sandwich. That's an independent clause. I can put a period at the end of it. She went to the store. Period at the end of it. Done. I don't know where the file is. Great. Simple. We've got ourselves an independent clause there. Except we also have another clause inside of it. We're not going to cover that in this video. For that one, I encourage you to take a look at the noun clause video that is also available on my site here. Okay. Anyhow, that's independent clauses. Let's take a look at dependent clauses. Dependent, it comes from the same root word as depend, because that's exactly what it is, and I just said something that sounds stupid. Okay, such is life. Depend. And when we say depend, what we're really saying is that existence is determined by something else, or that it's linked to something else. And that's what this means right here. These are clauses which cannot be stated by themselves. They're not independent. They do require help. They contain an element called a subordinator. That's this word right here, subordinator. And what a subordinator is a word that requires you to link a dependent clause to an independent one. Basically, it works like this. Anytime you see a subordinator in a sentence, it says, sorry, this is no longer independent. It requires some help from someone else. Huh? Okay, basically it works like this. Because I was hungry. Because I was hungry, what? The subordinator right here is this word, because. As soon as you see because, you know, this can't be by itself. It needs to be linked to something else. That's exactly what because tells us. And that's why you might have had a teacher in the past who said you can never start a sentence with because. Sorry, that's a lie. You can start a sentence with because. The real trick is when you use because, it tells not only you but also the reader that you're not finished yet. It says, sorry, this is no longer independent. It's dependent now. It needs to be linked to something else. Let's take a look at this one. I ate a sandwich. Hey, you know what? No problem. There's no subordinator. We have a clear subject, I, and we have a clear finite verb, ate. Okay, what I can do is this. Boom. Oh, now life is good. Because I was hungry, I ate a sandwich. Now, I'm going to hit Control-Z a couple of times here. And there we go. And notice, Microsoft gets very pissed off at me. It's putting a nice green line under everything right here. And the reason it's doing that is because of this because right here. Watch what happens if I get rid of because. Oh, the Microsoft gods are happy. Yay! And really, that's what's going on. If I just have this, I was hungry, no problem. I have here a clear subject, a verb that shows the time, it's the past, and it clearly identifies I as the subject. But as soon as I put that word back in there, because, whoops, now we've got the same problem. And what that means is this is dependent. It needs to be linked to an independent clause. And there we go. Dependent, independent. Put them both together and life is good. So let's review this briefly. A dependent clause is a clause that cannot be stated by itself. They contain an element called a subordinator, and that's a word like because. And as soon as you see that word, it tells you that you have to link whatever clause you've got to another clause that is independent. Okay. Well, why should you care about this? Well, hopefully you took the time to actually watch the stupid video, and so you actually do care a little bit. But the real trick is this. This is one of those mistakes that teachers hate to see. And it's a mistake that they really can't identify a lot. They're not actually going to come up to you and say, oh, well, you've linked too many dependent clauses to each other without an independent clause. Or you presented a dependent clause as if it were an independent clause. They're not going to do that. They're just going to say, oh, you had grammar mistakes, and they're not really going to identify them. But this is one of the big ones that makes them say, oh, you've got grammar problems. Think of it like this. Anytime you're writing any sentence, every sentence has to have at least one clause. So we need to think about clauses in that case. And let's think about this. If a sentence has only one clause, maybe you can fill in the rest of the sentence for me. If a sentence has only one clause, what type of clause is it going to be? Dependent or independent? Tick, 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 tick. Hopefully you said it must be an independent clause, and that's the bottom line. You can't write a sentence that looks like this. Because I was hungry. That does not work. Even Microsoft can figure that out. Because I was hungry. Sorry. So that's a very important thing to pay attention to. You need to be identifying your dependent versus independent clauses. Okay. And as I said, using dependent clauses inappropriately is a major error in academic English. That's what I was just talking about. It's one of those things that pisses off your teachers that fast. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've talked about so far. Phrases. Phrases are groups of words without a finite verb. We had a couple of examples here. The person having the most money. That was one. Here's another one. One of the most important ideas. Okay. Here's another one. Each participant in the survey given by the department. These were examples of phrases because they don't have finite verbs and they don't have clear subjects. Easy enough. We looked at how you have adverb phrases too. You have various types of stuff, blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is the most common types of phrases you're going to see in academic English and the most common types that you should use are noun and adverb phrases. Okay, we talked about clauses briefly. A clause is a group of words that does have a definite subject and a finite verb. Just like we looked at up here, right? Hey, here we go. We got three clauses right here. We have subject, clearly, yes, and verb, clearly, yes. Guess what? They're clauses. All right. We have two types of clauses, independent and dependent. Easy enough. Independent clauses, we can say them by themselves. We can put a period at the end of them. There we go. Dependent clauses. These ones you cannot say by themselves. You have to link them to an independent clause, and that's because they contain this special thing right here, a subordinator. And one word that we looked at that's a subordinator is because. Okay, and there we go. Hopefully this has all been pretty much review for you. Let's take a look down next at what we're coming to. The important part, which is this, sentences. You might be asking yourself, why not just start with sentences? I know what a sentence is. My God, let's start with that, then we can talk about the stupid grammar stuff, phrases, clauses. Well, actually, you don't really know what a sentence is until you know what phrases and clauses are. Because sometimes a sentence and a clause are the same thing. A sentence and a phrase are never the same thing. So, let's define this pretty quickly. What is a sentence? All right, here's the deal. A sentence is a group of words with at least one independent clause, which can be stated by itself. It can contain several clauses and phrases. Let's break that down again. It's a group of words, all right, with at least one independent clause, right? which can be stated by itself. It can contain several clauses and phrases. So basically, a sentence is one independent clause plus whatever else you want to put around it. So here's an example. I went to the store. Easy. I went to the store. That right there is a sentence. And you could also call it an independent clause. They're the same thing right here. There's nothing special, you know? I ate 10 hamburgers. Same deal. It's a simple independent clause, and it works as a sentence right there. 10 hamburgers ate me. Whatever. No big deal. Now let's take a look at the next one here. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good. Not a sentence. Sorry. This doesn't work. This is actually just one noun phrase with an adjective clause inside it. There's nothing independent here. If we take a look at this, basically we've got the really big hamburger, okay, there we go, in the back room, okay, so this is telling me where the hamburger is. That tasted good. And again, this right here is an adjective clause that's modifying this hamburger right over here. I don't actually have a finite verb on its own right now. So I could say something like this. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was, I don't know, 97% beef. There we go. Now I've got myself a full sentence. Before, I didn't have one. Same deal. I come down to the next one. After he told me about the hamburger problem, what we have right here is another subordinator, just like what we were looking at before. It's a subordinator, and that means that we have here a dependent clause. It needs to be linked to an independent clause. If I wanted to fix it, here's one way of doing it. Comma. I got very scared, just like that. After he told me about the hamburger problem, I got very scared. Now I've got an independent clause. I got very scared, and that helps me complete this sentence. Now I have dependent clause, independent clause. Those two together form one sentence. Okay, come down to the next one. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was actually an alien carnivore sauce. Same deal, you know? And we find another version of things right here. After he told me about the hamburger problem, I called the Men in Black. In each case, right here, we have one noun phrase. Inside that noun phrase, we have an adjective clause. And then we have the to be verb and another noun phrase afterwards. Nice and simple. Right here, we have one dependent clause and then one independent clause. Put them together, we got ourselves a sentence. All right, so again, coming back to the top. What is a sentence? Well, it's a group of words with at least one independent clause. Has to have at least one, which can be stated by itself, meaning that a sentence can be stated by itself. You can just put it out there, boom, you're done. You can put a period at the end of it, one of those nice little dots right there. It can contain several phrases and, several clauses and phrases. And there we go. Next up, simple, compound, complex, and compound/complex sentences. So, even though we just said, yes, what's a sentence? It's basically this right here. Group of words with at least one independent clause. Well, that could, be a bunch of different things. And we saw down here, too. We have two different forms. In this case, noun phrase, verb, noun phrase. Right here we have dependent clause, and then we have independent clause right there. Okay, well, they're both sentences, but they have slightly different forms right there. So the deal is this. We like to classify sentences into these four types just to make it easier to identify them, to help us figure out, well, what are we supposed to use in different genres, different types of papers, right? Okay, so we'll start out with the simple stuff, simple sentences. Simple sentences are sentences that consist of one independent clause. They can include multiple phrases, but only one clause. Again, this is the deal. Simple sentences, one independent clause, maybe lots of phrases, but only one clause. Okay, case in point, I went to the store. This is a simple sentence. I have a subject, I have a verb. It's just one independent clause. Um, but I can change this. I can add some phrases to it, and it's still going to be a simple sentence. Despite the temperature outside, I went to the store. Now, you look at this and you say, well, this is pretty long, but it's still a simple sentence. This right here is just a phrase, and so it still counts as a simple sentence. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. I ate 10 hamburgers. All right, now I can add another verb phrase here. And it says here, add additional verb phrase, maintain subject. Here's what I mean by that. Our verb phrase here is ate 10 hamburgers. That's the verb plus the whatever object might come after it. Now, I'm going to add something else here. I ate 10 hamburgers. Sorry. And let's see here. I ate 10 hamburgers and drank 10 sodas. Okay, this actually counts as a simple sentence. The reason for that is, even though you're looking at it, you say, well, wait, there's two things happening here. Eating 10 hamburgers, drinking 10 sodas. Yeah, but they both have the same subject. And because of that, this one right here is actually just a phrase. It's not a clause on its own. So this counts as a simple sentence as well. Same deal. 10 hamburgers ate me. Well, let's just leave this alone. Now, let's look at this next one here. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was actually an alien carnivore assassin. Yeah, we had this already. And it is not a simple sentence. Sorry. The reason it's not a simple sentence is, we've got this, the really big hamburger in the back room. We're good so far. Oh no, then we get to this. That tasted good. This right here is a dependent clause. It's an adjective clause. It modifies hamburger. And because of that, this is no longer a simple sentence. Same deal. After he told me about the hamburger problem, oh no, this is not going to work anymore either. We have after. After is a subordinator. Since it's a subordinator, that tells me we have ourselves a dependent clause right here. And here's the deal. A simple sentence only has one independent clause. That's it. One clause. So this is not going to be an independent, this is not going to be a simple sentence. All right, next up, compound sentences. Compound sentences are sentences that have at least, now this is important to remember here, at least two independent clauses that are connected with a conjunction. What's a conjunction? One of the fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So keep this in mind. When we're talking about a compound sentence, it has at least two independent clauses. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, it means this. Here's an example. I went to the store, and my wife stayed at home. If I break this in half, I see I went to the store, and I see my wife stayed at home. I could say either one of these by itself. When I try to put them together, I have to put this and in the middle. That's one of our fanboys. It's a conjunction. So this then is a compound sentence. It's two independent clauses with a conjunction in between them. Now I made a little note to myself here to add more, so let's try to do that a little bit right now. All right. I went to the store and my wife stayed at home, so I had to do all the shopping. Again, now I've got one more independent clause. I had to do all the shopping. And I have these two little links right here. So and and. They're both our fanboys, our conjunctions. So if we look at this sentence, we actually have three independent clauses linked with conjunctions. That's what makes them compound sentences. When we say compound, literally what that means is just stuck together. Two elements, two chemicals, whatever else the case might be, that have been put together as one. And so we have here three independent clauses stuck together as one sentence. That's why we call it compound. All right, same deal here. I ate 10 hamburgers and my doctor started to cry. Same deal. Independent clause and independent clause. 10 hamburgers ate me and I had a very bad day. Again, same deal right there. We don't need to go into any more detail in that in particular. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was actually an alien carnivore assassin, so I decided not to go near it. This one's a little bit different. Can you see why? I'll tell you what. Pause the video briefly. Just go ahead and hit pause and see if you can figure out why this one is not the same as these three right here. Go ahead, hit pause. Okay, hopefully you hit pause and hopefully you took a look at that, and I'll tell you why it's a bit different right now. This part right here. That tasted good. This is an adjective clause modifying hamburger, as I've said a couple times already. Because this one is an adjective clause, it's actually dependent. So we have here a dependent clause, and we have an independent clause, and another independent clause. That makes this a little bit more tricky. This actually is a compound complex sentence. We're going to get to that in a little bit. In order to understand that, though, we have to figure out what we're talking about. What's a complex sentence? Well, let's take a look. That's next up. Complex sentences. Complex sentences are sentences that have at least one dependent clause, and, here's the trick, only one independent clause. Once again, they're sentences that have at least one dependent clause. They can have a bunch of dependent clauses, but they have only one independent clause. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. I went to the store. Sorry, this is not a complex sentence. It just has one independent clause. So we need to add a dependent clause after it. So let's use our subordinator from before. Because. Okay, I went to the store because I needed food. Great! Now I have a complex sentence. I have an independent clause and I have a dependent clause. All right, let's try another one here. I ate 10 hamburgers. Same deal. I ate 10 hamburgers. Let's see here. How do we want to modify this one? It's just one independent clause. We need to fix this somehow. You know what? I'm going to keep the period right there. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to take a clause, a dependent clause, and I'm going to put it in front here. Because I am crazy, I ate 10 hamburgers. Okay, there we go. This works. Now I have a dependent clause followed by an independent clause. Now I could change this a little bit more too, if we wanted to. Here we go. Because I am crazy. Here we have a dependent clause. I ate 10 hamburgers. Independent. And now, although my doctor told me not to, this right here is another dependent clause. So I have two dependent clauses, one independent clause. This is still a complex sentence. Easy enough. Next up, 10 hamburgers ate me. Well, okay, same deal. This doesn't work. 10 hamburgers ate me because they were hungry. Okay, now we have independent clause followed by dependent clause. All right, next up. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was actually an alien carnivore assassin. Oh no, this is the one we were just looking at up here, right? And saying like, that's kind of strange, it doesn't work. This one right here actually works. This is a complex sentence, and here's why. If I look at it, I say, okay, the really big hamburger in the back room was actually an alien carnivore assassin. Okay, I have one independent clause, and inside that independent clause, I've got this little adjective clause, a dependent clause. Great. So I have one independent clause, one dependent clause. That fits our definition. It's a complex sentence. Same deal. Let's come down here. After he told me about the hamburger problem, I called the men in black. Hey, dependent clause, independent clause. That's a complex sentence. Boom. Now, let's come down to the next one. compound, complex. All right, we've just looked at that. We looked at what compound sentences are. It has to have at least two independent clauses that are connected with a conjunction. And we looked at what a complex sentence is. At least one dependent clause and only one independent clause. Okay, so now we come down to this. Compound complex sentences. These are sentences that have at least two independent clauses joined by a conjunction and at least one dependent clause. And that leaves us with what the huh? Yeah, well, I know. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was actually an alien carnivore assassin. Now, if you remember, we just looked at this and we said, yeah, this is an example of what type? Yes, complex. It's a complex sentence. So that's what we got. Here's a complex sentence. But when we were looking at compound sentences, this one was sitting in there. The really big hamburger in the back room that tasted good was actually an alien carnivore assassin, so I decided not to go near it. This is our model of a compound complex sentence. Now let's go through the definition here. Sentences which have at least two independent clauses. Okay, so we'd have to find two independent clauses here. Well, here's one. I decided not to go near it. It's an independent clause. And here's another. The really big hamburger in the back room, blah, 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 was actually an alien carnivore assassin. So I have two independent clauses. Great. They have to be joined by a conjunction. Well, let's see if we can find one. One of our fanboys. And here we have so. All right, so we've got that. And at least one dependent clause. Huh. Where can we find that? Right here. That tasted good. Here's our adjective clause. The adjective clause modifying hamburger. Because of that, we can see what we've got. Two independent clauses, one dependent clause, and a conjunction. And there we go. So let's see if we can do that with these three briefly. I have here three simple sentences. They just consist of one independent clause each. Now, first thing we need to do if we want to turn them into compound complex is make sure that we can add all the ingredients. We need one more independent clause joined by a conjunction, and we need a dependent clause. Okay, let's try this. I went to the store. How about this? Because I was hungry, now we have ourselves a dependent clause. I went to the store. Okay. Well, I only have one independent clause. I have one dependent clause. I need a conjunction and another independent clause. So let's see what we can do here. Because I was hungry, I went to the store so that I could buy food. All right, there we go. I went to the store so that I could buy food. We've got ourselves a conjunction. We've got another independent clause after that. Well, that actually doesn't work very well. I'm actually just going to get rid of the that to make this a little bit easier to understand. So we've got independent clause, conjunction, independent clause. All right. Next up, I ate 10 hamburgers. Now I'm just going to take our same because I was hungry, copy and paste it down here because it works. I ate 10 hamburgers because I was hungry. Let's see here. Let's add another thing here. So when I was finished. So when I was finished, I was very full. Same deal. I ate 10 hamburgers because I was hungry. Here I have independent clause number one. I ate 10 hamburgers. Right here I have a dependent clause because I was hungry. Next up, I get a conjunction. So, oh, and here's the real trick. When I was finished, this is another dependent clause. Oh my goodness gracious. And now we have another independent clause. So if we count them up, I have 1, 2 independent clauses, and 1, 2 dependent clauses, and 1 conjunction in the middle. My goodness. One more here. 10 hamburgers ate me. Okay, we'll stick our standard one in here because they were hungry. Okay, so now I have 10 hamburgers ate me because they were hungry. I have independent clause, dependent clause. But I need to add a conjunction and another independent clause in here. Let's see what we can do. But I did not like it. Okay, here's our conjunction, but, and here's another independent clause. I did not like it. All right. Now, let's go over this again briefly. So, to recap, a sentence. A sentence, easy enough, is a group of words with at least one independent clause that can be stated by itself. It can contain several phrases and clauses. We have four types. Simple. A simple sentence just has one independent clause. It can have several phrases, but only one independent clause. A compound sentence is a sentence that has at least two independent clauses joined with a conjunction. Again, it can have several phrases in it too. A complex sentence has only one independent clause, but it also has at least one dependent clause. It can have many dependent clauses in it, but only one independent clause. And finally, the one that we were just looking at, compound complex. It has to have at least two independent clauses joined by a conjunction, and it has to have at least one dependent clause. And there we go. All right, now let's get down to brass tacks. What does academic writing actually use? All right, basically it's this: complex sentences and simple sentences with lots of phrases. That is academic writing in a nutshell right there. Lots of complex sentences, lots of simple sentences, and tons of phrases inside there. So we looked at this already briefly. This is just a paragraph from a native speaker's paper. This was taken from the Michigan Corpus. It's available online free of charge to anybody who wants to take a look at it. So please feel free to check this out. And here we have, undoubtedly, one of the most influential events of the formation of the late baby boomers' political ideals. As we said before, here's our noun phrase. And if you look at it, we have a simple sentence. This is actually a simple sentence. We have one adverb, just an adverb phrase at the beginning, so there's a phrase. Then we have one subject, one of the most influential events in the formation of the late baby boomers' political ideals. So up to this point, that's our subject. Here's our verb, and here's the predicate nominative that comes after it. It's a simple sentence, even though it's big. Let's see here. If we take a look at the next one, the ugly protracted war. Okay, there's our subject, developed. Here's our verb, a wariness of war. There's our object, and then among the young people who lived through it. Now, I'm not going to go into detail right there. You could call that an indirect object, or you could call it a secondary object. You could argue the point and say that English has no direct object or indirect object. Let's leave it alone. In the 1980s, here is a phrase, an adverb phrase, telling us about time. The United States once again began a reckless form of imperialism. We have another simple sentence right here with several phrases inside it. Let's take a look at this next one here. In moves similar to that of Vietnam, okay, there you go, adverb phrase. The U.S. belligerently interfered with many poverty-stricken Central American countries. That right there is just one simple sentence. And now we get including El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, another adverb phrase, and attempted to institute governments that were beneficial to U.S. interests. Wow, very tricky. But if you look at it, even though we've got this and right here, and attempted to institute government, well, who's the subject of this verb? Attempted and attempted. Guess what? The subject is the U.S. So if we look at this, we have the U.S. interfered with, so I'm sorry, let me highlight that again. The U.S. interfered with and attempted to. This right here is our subject. Here's one verb phrase. Here's another verb phrase. Believe it or not, this giant sentence right here is actually fairly simple. The only thing that makes this a complex sentence is this right here, that were beneficial to U.S. interests. This is just like what we saw up above. This is an adjective clause that's modifying governments right here. So this is a complex sentence, but just barely. The only reason it's complex is because we have this one little adjective clause right at the end here. If we get rid of this, it's just a simple sentence. Weird, right? All right, we'll leave the rest of that alone for now. Um, if you take a look up there, though, you'll notice something that I like to call the 3 to 5 rule of thumb. And this works for sentences. Uh, Basically, it works like this. Each sentence should have between 3 and 5 phrases and clauses. If you have more than that, it's too long. If you have less than that, it's too short. So again, if we take a look briefly, we see, if we just count up the phrases in here, undoubtedly, there's one adverb that counts as an adverb phrase. Um, and then we get one of the most influential events in the formation of the late baby boomers' political ideas, one giant long noun phrase, right? Inside of it, we say one of the most influential events in the formation of the late baby boomers' political ideas. We can break that apart into, 2, 3 phrases if we want to, but one clause. If we break it down, again, we're inside the 3 to 5 rule. Let's take a look at that. Let's just take a look at this one that we were looking at earlier in moves similar to that of Vietnam. So here we've got an adverb phrase. That's one. The U.S. belligerently interfered with many poverty-stricken Central American countries. So there's a clause, including El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. Okay, so we've got ourselves one phrase, one clause, another phrase, and now we have and attempted to institute governments that were beneficial to U.S. interests. All right, this is another phrase. It's a verb phrase. And inside that verb phrase, we have one more clause, an adjective clause. And that hits our number 5 limit right there. We have 3 phrases, 2 clauses. If it were longer than that, that's when you would have teachers starting to say, whoa, maybe you want to shorten that sentence down a little bit. So that is the 3 to 5 rule of thumb. But there is a corollary to that, which is that short sentences equal shouting. Basically, it works like this. If you have a simple sentence with no phrases in academic writing, it sounds like shouting. Again, it sounds like shouting. So this is what we were looking at before, this paragraph, right? Okay, let's take a look at what it looks like if we just change it into short sentences, simple sentences. All right, we can leave the first one alone, basically. But it had an adverb phrase at the beginning of it, undoubtedly, right? So we're going to have to get rid of that. Let's put that in the next part here. Whoops, okay, I'm not that good with Microsoft Word. So this is doubtless. I'm going to add it into a new clause after that first sentence. The ugly, protracted war developed, let's see here, yeah, developed awareness of war. It developed this among the young people. These young people lived through it. The United States once again began a reckless form of imperialism. It did this in the 1980s. The U.S. interfered with many Central American countries. It did this belligerently. It was similar to moves in Vietnam. Again, this is reading through this is actually kind of tough. It sounds like someone just shouting at you constantly. Like every piece of information is extremely important and needs to be stated in its own independent sentence. So if you do that, if you write like this, you can be pretty sure that your teacher is never going to give you a grade higher than about a C-. And if they do, that's just because they're being very, very nice. Okay, that's enough for now. Good luck.